the incident of 9/11. Let's talk about the incident of the Twin Towers crashing in New York and the connection with the Illuminati. Here were some of the breaking news comments from TV broadcasters in New York City as it was happening live that fateful day, September 11th, 2001.
There was heard some kind of secondary, follow-up explosion. At 10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, collapsing on itself was the World Trade Center. We have no idea what caused this. And now police are trying to determine whether that explosion was caused by the initial impact of the plane or whether it was something that exploded on the ground. Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion or a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself. If you wish to bring it down, anyone who's ever wanted to watch a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have got to get down under the infrastructure to bring it down.
The Twin Towers were composed of 200,000 tons of steel, 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, 103 elevators, 43,600 windows, 60,000 tons of cooling equipment, and a 360-foot antenna. The core of each tower was 87 by 133 feet, comprised of 47 box columns, 37 by 16 inches thick. Were the Twin Towers brought down as a result of the airplanes that struck them and the fires that followed, or were they brought down from a controlled demolition? Some were calling it a pancake theory. According to the fires, while not melting the steel, it heated up sufficiently to cause the floors weakened by the airplane strike to break loose from the steel columns and thus starting a chain reaction. So you would expect then from that theory, which became the official theory, to see a whole stack of floors piled up on top of one another, and a spindle of core columns still standing too. The core of the Twin Towers consisted of 47 massive steel columns. If the floors had broken loose from them, these columns would still be sticking up in the air 1,000 feet. The plane did not cut all of those core columns.
We designed the buildings to take the impact of a plane the size of a Boeing 707, hitting the building at any location.
Les Robertson, World Trade Center, structural engineer.
The building could probably have sustained multiple impacts of those jets.
Frank DiMartini, manager, World Trade Center construction. If you dropped, let's say, a billiard ball from the top of the World Trade Center, 110 floors up there, it would have taken 8 to 10 seconds for it to hit the ground, encountering no resistance whatsoever. The Twin Towers, however, came down at nearly freefall speed. 200,000 tons of steel shatters and explodes outwards over 500 feet. This means that floors shattered at an average rate of about 10 floors per second. There's no scenario for a pancake effect of buildings falling that allows them to fall at the rate of free fall. Now, what can do that? What can move mass out of the way like that? Explosives.
Eyewitnesses also report that explosions had taken place in lower levels of both the North and South Towers.
Our office was on the B1 level. As I was talking to a supervisor at 8:46, all of a sudden we hear boom, an explosion so hard that it pushed us upwards, and it came from the basement, between the B2 level and the B3 level. And when I went to verbalize, we hear another boom, the impact of the plane on the top.
William Rodriguez, 20-year employee at the World Trade Center.
As I'm walking by the main freight car of the building in the corridor was when it went off. The impact of the explosion threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening. All of a sudden, a big impact happened again, and all the ceiling tile was falling down. Light fixtures were falling, and I got moving to the South Tower basement. You gotta go clear across the hole from one to the other trade center. Then all of a sudden, it started happening all over again, with something else. It was from the floor, right from the basement is where you felt it. Walls were caving in. Everything was going on. I know people got killed in the basement. I know of people who got broken legs in the basement. People who got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face in the basement.
Philip Morelli was in sub-basement 4 of the North Tower. On 9/11, New York City lost 343 firefighters at the World Trade Center. Since they were the ones inside the towers before, and as they collapsed, I'd say they've got a pretty good grasp on what happened. So let's hear what the FDNY thinks.
I went around by the freight elevator and I could see it was just blown out. At the 30th floor, we hear another explosion, and then we heard another huge explosion. I was taking firefighters up to the 24th floor to get into a position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building.
Louis Cacchioli, New York City Fire Department. The firefighters' transmissions tapes are finally revealed. For more than a year, the Port Authority blocked the release of the tapes from the firefighters' transmissions at the World Trade Center on 9/11. In November 2002, the transmissions were finally released to the New York Times and other news outlets. Why did it take so long to get the transmissions released? These transmissions revealed the voices of eyewitnesses who were saying that there were explosions on floors 7 and 8, 7 and 8.
Battalion 3 to dispatch. We've just had another explosion, Warren Street, because of the secondary explosion, and we've got numerous people covered with dust from the secondary explosion.
We got another explosion on the tower, 10 and 13, 10 and 13.
Tower 2 just had a major explosion and what appears to be a complete collapse surrounding the entire area. I was involved in the secondary explosion at Tower 1.
One eyewitness whose office is near the World Trade Center told AFP that he was standing among a crowd of people on Church Street 2.5 blocks from the South Tower when he saw, quote, a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He said he saw about 6 of these flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed.
You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black firecrackers and you lit them up and set them all off at once. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the finale of the 4th of July over the East River.
What do you think those crackling, firecracker-like popping sounds really were? And what about the big explosions that were heard just before the towers collapsed? There's a short segment of video and audio footage revealing a man talking to a family member using a firefighter's communications unit.
Here's one of those guys who can tell you I'm all right. Here, hold on.
Then proceeds to give the handheld unit back over to the firefighter. But before taking it back, the firefighter asks the man,
"Do you want to call your mother or something?"
Immediately after asking, 2 major explosions occurred and video footage cuts. If the towers came down because of the burning jet fuel, then what caused the explosions? A controlled demolition. What does science have to say about the collapses? The collapse of the World Trade Center was picked up by Columbia University's observatory in Palisades, New York. The South Tower registered as a 2.1 earthquake. The North Tower registered as a 2.3 earthquake. On September 14, 2001, one of the seismologists at the Palisades Seismology Group, Won Young Kim, told AFP that
the seismographs register daily underground explosions from a quarry 20 miles away. These blasts are caused by 80,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate and cause local earthquakes between magnitude 1 and 2. The 1993 truck bomb at the WTC did not register on the seismographs because it was not coupled to the ground.
During the collapse, most of the energy of the falling debris was absorbed by the towers and the neighboring structures, converting them into rubble and dust or causing other damage, but not causing significant ground shaking.
Dr. Arthur Lerner Lamb, Senior Research Scientist and Associate Director of Seismology, Geology, and Tectonophysics at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, LDEO, of the Earth Institute of Columbia University.
47 huge steel columns going up the core, and they're interconnected. How do you get them to fail simultaneously so the core disappears? It looks like those core columns were cut.
Dr. Stephen Jones, physics professor at BYU.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle.
Controlled demolition expert. Take a little time to do an image search on the internet for the World Trade Center, core columns after the collapse, to see the angles.
And our conclusion is that the building should not have fallen that rapidly if indeed fire caused the collapse. In fact, there's one mechanical engineer, Gordon Ross, in the Journal of 9/11 Studies, who's done a thorough analysis based on the conservation momentum.
Professor Stephen Jones, PhD, Brigham Young University, retired U.S. Department of Energy, Los Alamos Laboratory. So if the official story is correct, then...
If the official story is correct, then the heating that was supposed to have caused the failure would have been a much slower event, and it would have been an asymmetric event. For the tower to collapse straight down and onto itself like that flies in the face of what we know about steel and how steel behaves. If we have a failure in one area, then the failures tend to continue within that area, and you'd see an asymmetric collapse, possibly the upper section falling off as it twisted away from the tower and falling off. But it's very unusual to see the upper section falling straight through the path of the greatest resistance, which is straight down through the middle of the tower. It just doesn't all add up. What we should have seen in the debris pile was a pyramidal shape. Had it been a gravity-done collapse, you would have seen roughly a pyramidal shape or a conic shape. But what we actually did see was a massive ejection of dust and debris and large sections of steel from well within the terrace that came to be 10 meters away from the terrace. But it's hard to see a reason for that within a gravity-driven collapse.
David Scott, structural engineer. Huge steel beams, weighing up to 200,000 pounds, were thrown laterally up to 500 feet. A cross-section from the World Trade Center weighing approximately 300 tons was embedded in the southeastern corner of the American Express building. This huge piece of steel would have had to travel at least 390 feet, maintaining enough kinetic energy to embed itself in the corner of this neighboring building. Do you still think the jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? In all the videos of the collapses, the explosions can be seen bursting from the building 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Etienne Sauret was filming and caught both collapses on tape. Watch the documentary called The World Trade Center, the first 24 hours, and you'll see the tripod shaking 12 seconds before the North Tower even begins to collapse, and something is knocked off the right-hand side of the building. So you're probably asking yourself, if bombs were in the building, how would they get in there without anyone noticing? Unannounced and unusual drills prior to 9/11. Ben Fountain, a financial analyst who worked in the World Trade Center, told People magazine that
in the weeks before 9/11, there were a number of unannounced and unusual drills for sections in both the Twin Towers and in Building 7. They were telling us that the buildings had to be evacuated for security reasons.
Terry Accord, a guard in the North Tower, told Newsday that
our security detail had all been working 12-hour shifts for the past 2 weeks prior to 9/11 because of numerous phone threats. But strangely, on Thursday the 6th, the bomb-sniffing dogs were removed from the building.
Who authorized all this? So what was Securicom, now known as Stratesec? Securicom, now known as Stratesec, is an electronic security company backed by Kuwait American Corporation, QAM, which provided security for United Airlines, Dallas International Airport, and from the early 1990s up to the day of 9/11, the World Trade Center. President Bush's brother Marvin was on that board of directors at Securicom from 1993 until fiscal year 2000. Marvin is also the former director at HCC Insurance Holdings, which insured parts of the World Trade Center on 9/11. More information on this was supposed to be disclosed, but never was. To date, the SEC hasn't revealed anything at all about it. If only we could have had more time to examine the debris from the World Trade Center, maybe we'd know more about how and what happened. Unfortunately, at the time, Mayor Rudy Giuliani began shipping the remains off to recycling yards overseas before investigators could even examine it. Not even FEMA was allowed inside Ground Zero then. Essentially, they blocked off a crime scene and destroyed all the evidence. So, how is it that the US government and the mainstream media would lie to us about what really happened on that fateful day of September 11th, 2001? That was truly a day in United States history that we should all remember and pause to ponder about.